Hi, I'm Zoe Fletcher, the head at Wood Primary School in Spondon, Derby. We've been involved in a project with Derby College and the Derby Book Festival focusing on empathy, diversity, inclusion and wellbeing, and I'm really proud of what the children have learnt.
I thought that refugees were just people who travelled on boats to different countries, but this year I found out that they had to leave their country for drastic reasons and had to go on boats, and they had to survive difficult weather and conditions to find themselves a better life. If war broke out in this country and I was a refugee, I'd be very, very scared and I wouldn't know what to do, because I'm lucky enough to not have a country that has wars and bombs, but if it did happen, it would be very unexpected and I just wouldn't know what to do. I learned that refugees have to cross borders to get into new countries, and it's very difficult and not all of them can get through the borders, and they can't always get into the country that they want to get to, so they have to stay in the country that they're in at that moment, and it couldn't be the best country maybe. I would like to learn how they feel when they travel across the world to get to the new country, because I wouldn't know what it feels like, so it would be interesting to know what their experiences are and how they felt.
Having read a few stories from the last few weeks from the Global Family, I have learnt some things new, and them things are that refugees can come from anywhere, and they can go anywhere. Before year 6, all I knew about the life of refugees was that I thought they were just people that decided to leave their home and that just wanted to go on boats to visit a new country. But now that I'm in year 6, I have learnt that it means a lot more than that. It means that it's like people that have been forced to leave their home because of war and conflict, and they've had to maybe if they're a child, join a new school or join a new community in a new country, and they would have had to learn different languages, and it would have been very hard for them. If I was forced to be a refugee, I would be very upset and I would feel discriminated, because I would feel like I would have been forced to do something that I may not have wanted to do, or that I would have had to leave my home country where my family, my friends and where my home is. I would like to learn about how refugees themselves would feel, how refugees themselves feel, and if they do have to leave and get a new country and a new home, would they be all right with that? If they learnt the new language, would they be okay with that, or would they want to go home? And if the war in their home country stopped, would like to go back?
Before this year's project, I thought that people that are refugees went out of their country just to find maybe a better life or something along that lines, but since that's happened, I've seen all the struggles and more stuff that they have done, and if there was a war or something happening in where I live, I wouldn't have known what to do. I would have just panicked probably. If I had to learn a new language, I would have been very stressed, very confused, and very motivated at the same time, because I would want to know what the language is so I could learn how to speak it, so I could communicate with other people. When reading and learning all about refugees in the Global Family Project book, I have learned more about travelling and how long and how much they have travelled overseas and over land, on foot, on cars, on boats, on lorries. I feel like they would have been very scared, very weird, very confusing for them, because if I was them, travelling across sea especially, it would have been very crazy, because usually they would have gone on dinghy boats, which are very small, and if a lot of weight is put onto them, they would have definitely probably gone under the water, and loads of people probably would have drowned. So it would be very scary. And on lorry, it's illegal to do it on lorry, travel in the lorries. And if I was in a lorry and we got pulled over by the police, I didn't know what I was probably going to do.
During the pandemic, I think refugees would have struggled because they wouldn't have anybody to talk to or contact from the other side of the world, and they probably left family behind when they were travelling to the new country, so it was probably very difficult for them.
First of all, I thought that refugees were people who were just homeless, lived on the street and didn't have a home, and they were poor. But as I moved into my Year 6 class now, I found out that refugees were people that had come away from foreign countries, people that really had a really hard time in their life and must have needed help, and they really needed help as they were poor and had to go on many journeys and many modes of transport just to get to where they are now. Well, having read the stories of many refugees, I've learned that they're not just people who just sit on the streets and beg for money. They're people who actually really want a life. They want a better life because they've not had a good life in their previous country, which is quite far away. Well, I'd like to learn how does it feel, exactly how does it feel? People say it feels scared and nervous, but in detail, how does it feel? Do you feel anxious because of how long it was? Do you feel, I don't know, worried, anxious, all that, but in detail? And I'd like to know, do you think it was worth it? Because obviously the hardship and the journeys and all that to get to this country with no war, was it worth it?
I've learned that people have to travel in boats to get across. They don't travel in your normal cars or across motorways and stuff like that. They have to travel in boats, and some people have to sacrifice themselves and let their family go but not themselves, and it's really hard on them. Before this project, I just thought that refugees escaped their home because they just wanted to go to a different country. But now I've been in Year 6, I have the understanding that they've had to run away. They've had to go to a different country because it's not safe for them. They don't have a very nice life because of war, and they have to go somewhere else. If I went to another country and nobody spoke my language, I'd feel really scared and confused because I wouldn't be able to talk to anyone because they wouldn't have an understanding of what I'm saying and just think I'm trying to talk to them but they can't understand me, and it would just be really hard knowing that they can't listen to me or do anything with me. I'd like to learn why they leave. I know of war, but that's about it.
So what I've learned from about refugees from doing Our Global Family project was that their lives are very different to ours. Because if you go back a few years ago, they were living in their country, but they might have had to leave their country because it's very unsafe, as there's something like a war or religious reasons. And it was very different because they could have moved, but it would still be fine. And you also need to know, just because someone isn't from here, you still need to treat them in the same way, because how would you like if you got treated if you weren't from this country? So how refugees would feel as they're in this pandemic, if they are a refugee, how would they would feel as they can see their family or friends? I'd say they feel very upset because back in their home country it would have been very fun and they'd got to see their friends every day. But now that they've most probably moved to this country, it will be very hard for them because they've had to learn the new language. Money and stuff could be different.
By doing Our Global Family project, I learned that refugees' lives change a lot after they've moved because it's probably really difficult because there's this massive change that they're not used to. And, you know, they might have had to leave because something was bad, but it's their home. And at the end of the day, home is home and you don't like to leave there. But if it's unsafe for them. And I learnt that refugees, they go through a lot of struggle, and I thought they just had to leave their country and it was easy, they could just get on a boat. But I've learnt that they have to get a spot on that boat and they have to earn that spot on the boat because there's lots of refugees around the world that have to get that spot. And some of them really need it, and you're really lucky as a refugee if you do get that spot on the boat. I don't think my opinion has changed about refugees, because I've always thought that like they're really important people, and you know that they deserve a lot better than what they've got, and that's always been my opinion about them, and it's not really changed. It's changed in the way that I appreciate them even more, because I've realised what they have to go through on these really big journeys. I think it would have been hard for refugees without parents in the pandemic, because a lot has changed for them, and if they would have started getting into moves of things that happen in Derby, it's all just suddenly changed and we're in lockdown, we can't go out, and I feel like it would be better for them if they could go out, because they get to know the area more. And I feel like they can't see people, and if they don't see people, if they don't speak our language, they probably won't be able to learn as much of our language and catch on to things. And I feel like seeing people is just generally really important for mental health, because you know it just helps with like how you talk to people and what you do when you're like in social situations.
Before we did the project of our global family, I knew that refugees had to leave their country because it was very unsafe for them to live there, but I didn't really know that they would like sometimes just keep going to different places. I just thought they would like go somewhere and stay there, but it turns out that was an immigrant. But refugees, they can like go somewhere and then go somewhere again, and I think it might be difficult because they'll go to their home country and then they go to a next country which might have different pennies, and they couldn't use the pennies that they had already there, so they had to work they might have had to work really hard to get those pennies so they could survive. I think it will be difficult for a refugee to like come to a place that was in lockdown, because they'd like just come here, and then the country that they were in before might not have had that lockdown, and they wouldn't really know what was going on. So they would have really struggled to like ask people to know what's going on, because they might have even been in a different country that have a different language. So it will be hard to ask them what's going on, and I just think that even though you're from a different country, you still need to try and help them. So yeah, I just think that's a good thing to do.
Before I did like the global family book about refugees, I kind of had a little bit of knowledge on them, because I knew there were people that came from a different country over to a country that they didn't live in before. After we did the learning on refugees, I thought about them a lot differently, because I didn't really know what they really were at the start, so it was kind of a bit hard to know what they were. But after the learning, it was a lot easier, because we went into detail on them when we had like a book about them, so we knew what they were and where they came from, like what they meant.
What I learned about refugee was that they have to leave their country because it wasn't safe, and if that country wasn't safe, they have to move to another country, and then people will call him refugee, but his real name is not refugee. He's a real person, not just a refugee. Everyone will call him refugee, but his name will not be refugee. He's a real person. He has a different name than refugee. And he might feel a bit sad that he has to move, because he might have things that he really likes and that are really expensive and that he wants them again, but they might not have enough money. Leaving his friends and family behind will be really sad, and he will be very, 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 very worried and extremely worried if they're going to get into the biggest danger or something, and they might have nowhere to go.
When I read the books, I learnt that refugees are people who have to leave their country because it isn't safe. It's in war or bad things are happening. I think that refugees would feel sad, worried, upset and nervous when they have to leave their home.
When I learned about the refugees, I thought they were like it was just a nickname of someone, but then I learnt that they actually travelled to different countries because they could have been attacked by like soldiers, or there could be like a war there, or their house could have been burnt down, and they could be like a world war there. It would make them feel sad and worried.
I think I learned that people that are refugees don't want to leave their house because it's just so sad. I think that it's very, very hard to leave your house alone because it's very, very sad. I think it's very hard to understand the language because you've never been to that place before.
When I read the books, I learnt that a refugee was someone who had to flee their country because it wasn't safe and they were at war. And some refugees had to leave their family and friends behind. They also had to leave some really valuable things and their favourite things behind because they had to get out of the house quicker. And they found it quite hard to travel to a new country because other countries did not allow refugees to come into their country. So then they had to stay in little campsites and just live there until they found somewhere safe to be. My whole family does work for refugees because people from different countries have not got many clothes, so then we bring in clothes that we don't want anymore, so then they can have it, so then they won't have to wear the clothes every day.
Before we did the refugee thing, we had to do this thing on paper where they did like, have you ever met a refugee, and have you like sawn it, all of that stuff, and I didn't know it at all, so yeah, I didn't know at all. Now I've done the refugee project, now I know what refugees are. So they are people who have to go across the world because they may have like attacks coming. They were at their own place and then it may have been just doing something, and then there was a war, something like that, and then boom, you have to go to a different country, and I feel really bad for them because it's really hard to get into another country, all of that, and that's it.
Lockdown, I wasn't really in school at any of the lockdowns, so I homeschooled, and it was very hard because you had different teachers every week, and then basically you'd learn something, but you did get extra breaks than like your parents and family, so it was very fun, but you get a lot more learning at school and you can focus a lot more, so I'd say I prefer school.
During lockdown I was at school, and it was very strange because not everybody was there, and not all of my friends were there, and I only had one friend here, which was very strange because I couldn't play with everyone. And it put a lot of pressure on me because there was less people, so we had to answer more questions because not everybody was there to answer all the questions for you.
For the first lockdown, it was very chill and very just like subtle. We did some activities, but it still like worked for us. And in the second pandemic, when everything started kick back up and we started doing online school, it got very stressful, very confusing, very just overall weird, unusual, and it got a bit like scary, and it put a lot of stress on me because I would want to do as much learning as possible, and if I didn't do a piece of learning that I wanted to do, I would get very like scared and think, oh, should I send it in or not finished, or send it in finished? So it was really scary and stressful.
In the first lockdown, I felt quite sad and lonely, and I felt like I was just trapped in this small box that I wasn't allowed to leave, because I wasn't really allowed to meet my friends, because in the first lockdown I didn't have any contact with my friends, like I didn't have any internet that I could contact with them with, but I think it was very hard for me and my family. Wood School helped, and they gave us like deliveries and food that really helped us, and that was near enough how we survived lockdown. But it was very hard for me because obviously I couldn't see my friends and I couldn't see any of my family, like maybe my grandma or any of my relatives like that.
During the first pandemic, I was homeschooled, as not really many people were in lockdown school, as it was all brand new and everyone thought it was really bad if you went into school because you could catch something and you don't know. But during the second lockdown, I was homeschooled for 3 weeks before then entering school for about 2 months after the lockdown and everything going around. I felt like a bit sorry for the people who were at home, because they wouldn't get to learn as well as we did in school, and they wouldn't be able to learn with, they would learn with an online teacher at our school, but they wouldn't be able to learn in person. So if someone needed to repeat something, you couldn't say, please could you repeat that? Whereas on Teams you'd have to, yeah, just go with it. Whereas in school it's, you can repeat it.
In the very first lockdown, I think it was about 7 months, I didn't have much home learning. We did the start, we were really good, but then I was struggling to get onto the website, and it just all felt like it had just shut down on me. So I couldn't really do home learning. My mum, because she's a teacher, she tried to help me and support me and give me some tasks to do, but because she had to do work herself, she wasn't able to.
I think she really struggled, but she tried really hard, and I think she powered through it really well, because it probably changed a lot for her than doing it in person then on a camera, and lots of the students would keep themselves muted and keep their cameras off, and she couldn't know what they're doing. I mean, some of them could not be even listening, and she doesn't know because lots of them would have their cameras on, and she'd have to be concentrating on that but also concentrating on that I'm doing my work. And I sort of saw that when we were in lockdown. I tried my best to do my work by myself, but I really struggled sometimes, but I tried really hard to do it independently. And I think she just probably really struggled just having to focus on 2 things at once, because it's really hard. Not being able to go out and see my family and friends was really difficult, because I used to, like, when I'm at school, I'm used to playing games like tag and hide and seek, tag and touching games, but when we're in lockdown we're not allowed to touch, so it's hard to think of other games that we can play that don't involve touching. And not being able to see my family is quite difficult, because I quite like seeing my cousins and playing with them, because they've got like a lot of different toys and we like to play imagination games together. So it's been really difficult to get used to staying indoors. My experience of homeschooling was quite different to regular schooling because it's quite different because you had to change your teachers every week, and it was like the same teachers like twice in a row, so it was like one teacher, then the next teacher, then the teacher before. And it was quite different because they had like different teaching skills, so they wouldn't like, it's hard to explain because they wouldn't just like, one of them would like record it, so like if you miss it and then you didn't like know what was going on, you could watch it back, but the other teacher didn't record it, so if you did miss it then you wouldn't really know what was going on. So it was quite difficult when that happened to me because I didn't really know what was going on, and I had to keep asking in the chat what we had to do, and then everybody was doing the home learning, so it was quite difficult because they weren't really answering.
In lockdown, probably learn a bit of different things, because in maths we do revisits, but when we did maths then, we didn't really do many revisits until like the last few weeks of it. So it was a bit hard because you kind of forget the learning, and then when they come back to it, you kind of be like, what is this? I was quite supported by my family because I didn't really have anyone to play with, so it was my parents that I mainly played with. And so it was a lot hard because kids your age know what you're talking about, whereas adults might not know fully what you're talking about, so it's a bit harder.
In 2020 I had to go and not go to school because my mum was furloughed for work. Then it was half hard because I wanted to see my friends, and school was quite fun. And so, yeah, I just really didn't want to go and be just alone. And yeah, and then in 2021, yeah, it was really, really, really fun because, of course, you get to see your friends, you get to see everybody, your family, everybody. Get to say hello to the teachers. And yeah, that's it, really.